Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I am a digital marketer in life sciences. As we get started with Beth Houck, I just wanted to welcome my guest here. So, Beth Houck is the CEO of SonarMD. She brings over 25 years of diverse healthcare industry experience, ranging from strategy and business development to customer experience and leadership. So, with that, welcome, Beth.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, Don.
Yeah, it's great having you on. I appreciate it. And I always sort of like to start our discussion here with, first of all, what is that brought you to life sciences? Um, and then, how did you wind up as the CEO of Sonar MD?
Yeah, that we could take up a lot of time just on those two questions because, you're a little later in your career, the what brought you to something can be a long path. But generally speaking, what brought me to life sciences, I do like to go back to being a kid and being really, really interested in science. I was in particular very interested in um, biomedical science. I think I don't remember what year it was, but I remember the artificial heart.
Mm,
I remember all of the press around the artificial heart happening, and I remember so clearly being intrigued by it. I started like my son just graduated high school, so it's very fresh in mind of how the the kids that start college, they think they know what they want to do. And so when I started college, I with that, kind of interest in medical science and the artificial heart in mind, I started in biomedical engineering. And somebody asked me, they said, "Well, how long were you in biomedical engineering?" And I said, "Not very long," because you quickly learn that that's a really hard major. But the point being, I never lost my love of like of science and healthcare. And so I found my way back to it in maybe not as straightforward of a path as an 18-year-old might choose, but got back to it. Your second question was just how did I become the CEO of SonarMD? And I'll start on the other end with that question, which is not starting when I was 18, but actually, this is my first time as a CEO, but I have been a member of a founding team of a startup three times. So I've been the number two a couple times, and am pretty was always incredibly comfortable in that role. Kind of probably took it on as if I was the number one, and had the opportunity to take the CEO role about 3.5 years ago while I was here at Sonar. And perhaps perhaps it was the right timing, perhaps it was the right scope, or in my head it was the right scope, but it felt like the right thing to do. And I got to be honest, I think I possibly waited too long. I like it. I like it. It's good.
it's funny to me because I the the funny part about that statement is that a lot of other people oftentimes see stuff in us that we don't see, or they sort of accelerate the timeline a little faster than what we'd like. We're just not quite comfortable enough. I've seen that a couple times in my career, and sometimes I think waiting is a good thing, and other times maybe not.
It's so true. It's so true. But one of my board members at the time, who I just really adore, and was one of the reasons why I felt good about taking the role, was he said that with women in particular, there is a concept called the reluctant CEO, meaning like, I think I can do this. All right, I'll take it, but hold on, and if you kind of just get over that hump, you're right. Somebody saw something that you couldn't see yourself until you were doing it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's so good to have that encouragement as well. So, with your experience in strategy, business development, and operations, how does that contribute to some of the things that you have to look at and view today?
Yeah, I think you know, talking about taking that role, I think you can kind of put it up perhaps on a pedestal, or kind of have an impression of what it is. And I did have somebody tell me, you know it's just a different job that brings together a combination of things you've probably already done. And they weren't wrong. I think the fact that I touched so many different roles over my career really prepared me to do this role. I think I lean quite a bit more on the strategy side than I have. When you're doing operations, it's a little more nuts and bolts and a little easier to measure. But you have to rely on the strategy side. You also have to rely on the juggling, the like making sure that you're putting the right attention on the right thing and the right amount of the right things at the right time. So having roles that allowed me to touch a lot of different components of a job or of a company helped prepare me for this position.
Yeah. I feel like there is a transition that all of us have to make though too. And somebody said this the other day, and I thought that this was the perfect analogy, which was being in the balcony versus being in the dance. And
Mm,
so this concept of being more in the actual things that are happening inside of the company. Um, I feel, I mean, I've done the operations role, I don't know how many times now in companies. Only been the CEO a couple of times as well. And with the operations role, I feel like you have to play, especially in a startup, you have to play this very tactical sort of position as well as strategic. You have to have your mind kind of in two places at once a lot of times.
you
Where
aren't
I
kidding.
think the CEO, and correct me, I mean, you've been closer to this than I would say I have. In the CEO role, I feel like you spend a lot more time asking your team things that hopefully will draw some of the right answers out of them is the way I feel oftentimes, because I've sort of learned from some of the great CEOs that I've been around in startups. I feel like they just, I mean, honestly, they're counting on the talent to help, a lot more than having to control and tactically go do it. So,
Yeah.
are you finding the same thing?
Agreed. Yeah, I and it's hard, it's the hard part of the job too for those of us that were on the dance floor. It's hard to just sit in the balcony and not wanna go down and groove a little bit. And being in a small company, you still have to get your hands dirty and potentially do some of the hands-on work, but the way that you leverage yourself the most is by doing exactly what you just said, which is asking the right questions, putting the right goals in place, and making sure that even though you don't want to bring somebody up to the balcony, you give them that purview. Like
Mm,
you give them the vision that you have and you keep reminding them where those white spaces are, what they're trying to achieve, what the goal is, and you do it 10 times more than you think you should do it because you can't you can't reinforce that enough. So agreed. It's this very important balance, and the ones that do it well have an ability to hire well, push down to the right people, and ask just the right questions so that they know and stay on the right track. Because if you don't trust people and try to get into the weeds too much, you're not leveraging yourself enough. You're not going to grow fast enough. You're going to grow, period, but you're certainly not going to grow fast enough in case of a venture backed startup, because you have to let people go on their own.
yeah, I think a lot of that's so important. I mean, a lot of the points that you just made are so important, and I feel like the more that leaders ask, really structured questions and kind of know, I mean, they know where they're guiding people. Really good leaders kind of know where they're pointing the people to strategically make their impact, overall in the organization. And you know, if I feel like this leads me more or less to my next question about your MBA. So, I saw that you went to Duke University. You have a health services management concentration. Um, what is it that led you to that? And then, do you feel like you use those skills as well, since moving on?
Yeah. We can shoot this over to the people over at Fuqua and tell them that yes, I am indeed using my degree. So I had the opportunity when I was applying for business school. So I didn't have for people that kind of do the undergrad and then work for a few years and go back to full-time business school. So I guess I had a typical path that way. But when I was applying to business schools, I specifically looked at those that offered me an MBA but had a health concentration. So had some sort of program where I was going to have the opportunity to dig in a little bit more on the health side. I didn't want to specifically get an MPH or an MHA, although I don't know that those are very popular anymore. I wanted the MBA because healthcare, I mean, my goodness, it's 20% plus of GDP. There's a lot that encompasses the word healthcare. And I didn't want to pigeonhole myself at that point. Did I want to do pharma, device? Do I want to go to a health system? Do I want to do analytics and payer stuff? Like who knows? So I wanted the more well-rounded part of getting the MBA, but I wanted the concentration so that I could get there's some very uniquely healthcare things, as we know, that I wanted to make sure I understood so that I could contribute in that world well. I have a strong memory of a health policy class. Wish I could shout out to the professor, but I cannot remember his name. But I remembered like this case study where we were talking about how not rational healthcare was, and what the reason for the certificate of need process to be put in place in certain states. And I mean, to be honest, I had no idea what this whole concept was, but it's this whole sense that because healthcare is paid for as a public good in many ways, yet we still use a lot of capitalistic policies to drive how we make decisions. We end up having a very irrational uh, sector. So the whole story was about, I think it was like a gamma knife, I think was the
Ah,
device that we were
sure.
studying in the case study. And it was like, well, should you allow, in a particular market, should you allow, Duke, University of North Carolina, and the private health system all to own their own gamma knife? And from a capitalistic standpoint, you're kind of like, yeah, everybody should have a gamma knife so that anybody that wants one can get a gamma knife. But from a demand standpoint, you only really need one gamma knife for the whole area. In fact, you only need like zero point 0.5 of one or 0.25 of one because you don't really need it to be operating very often. And if all three of them buy gamma knives, we just made healthcare cost a whole lot more. And this was just mind blowing at the time. Like this whole concept of why policies are developed in order to rationalize healthcare costs in a market that have to play in yet a public market, right? Like we don't have nationalized healthcare. It was a lot to get our heads around. So that's a very long answer to like, yes, I use all of it, and I'm really happy that I have that combination of the MBA with the health management focus because it allowed me to see it from both perspectives.
I think it's a good explanation overall because not only did it impact the way that you think about industry decisions, but secondarily, I oftentimes run into people at conferences or in hallways or whatever that say, hey, look, I was a student and I was making this decision at this point in time, and happened to run across this episode right as I was making that episode, yeah, right as I was
Yes.
making that decision. So, hey, I think it's a good thing to bring up as well because I mean, all of us kind of have to go through that. You have these life decisions and you have kind of early career decisions that you have to make, and I think depending on what's in front of you, you have to make different school decisions as well. So yeah,
It's
so
true.
important.
And you do it with the best information you have in front of you at the time.
Right. And I mean, oftentimes you're just not prepared to make whatever the decision is anyway. You just gotta have to
Kids
make one.
today are gonna have a lot more than maybe what I had, between, ChatGPT and, or any sort of AI-assisted decision making, as well as the loads of data they have access to. You could argue that they can make those decisions easier, but yeah.
Yeah. Also true. So tell me a little bit more about SonarMD. What is it? What do you do there? And how is the company working to improve healthcare outcomes for patients?
Yeah, so SonarMD was founded by a GI physician. He had a aha moment when he was working with some of his patients where he realized that patients that were his most complex had inflammatory bowel disease, which is a category of chronic GI chronic GI conditions that include ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. So you get diagnosed with these conditions in your 20s, early 30s, and then you have them for life. They are chronic conditions. They in some cases you can really deteriorate with them, and get put on these high cost biologics to help keep your inflammation at bay and keep you in remission, but you're always managing these diseases. So he had these complex patients, and he gave them his cell phone number and said, call me anytime something bugging you, call me. And he had this revelation that people were showing up in the emergency room and potentially needing an inpatient admission, but they hadn't called him, and he didn't know why. So he got hold of some data, and he could see that you would expect that if you're showing up in the emergency room or requiring an inpatient admission, you probably had a visit to your physician within some period of time before that, because you're gearing up for that, right? You're gearing up, and his patients did not. So he had this aha moment while he was watching The Hunt for Red October. So hence the Sonar name. And he said, "What I need is a ping system, a system so that I can check in on my patients on a regular basis and collect their symptoms. So not have to have them make the judgment. So these are chronic patients. Like, I don't know if I feel worse yesterday, or I feel worse today than yesterday, because I always feel kind of bad, right? So don't make them have to make that judgment. Instead, collect patient symptom information so that so that I can use data and analytics to determine whether or not a patient is deteriorating." So he built a rudimentary system, and that system did yield some amazing results. He partnered with Blue Cross of Illinois and did a study, and on 200 plus patients, he could see that he was reducing inpatient admissions by keeping tabs on these patients by 70%. And he was reducing ER visits by 50% and saving the system a whole lot of money. So what really that study and that concept is really what launched the company. So what we did was we said, okay, now this is a little back to my point that I was making about health policy and how the system works. Now you got to figure out how you get paid for that, because nobody's paying you in the system to keep patients, or I shouldn't say nobody. It is not easy to get paid in the system for patients for keeping patients more well, and especially not this slice of patients. So we realized that if we could get get contracts with payers, where payers agree to allow us to take on a patient's total cost of care, or some metrics that define that utilization or something related to this disease, and we could get paid for outcomes, getting paid for keeping these people more well, we could save the system money, give the patients better service, get them more well, keep them more well, and give them more support between visits. They're chronic patients, and then we could run a good company doing that. So we did that, and that's really what launched Sonar about 6 years ago. So we take care of patients with these chronic diseases. We do use a value arrangement. So our payment arrangement is getting paid for outcomes. We get paid by the at-risk entity, so we get paid by the payer, and then we partner with those patients' doctors so that we're sitting in the middle to help take care of that patient better and help the system kind of get more lower total cost of care. So it works. We have 5 years of data now. So like our founder, Dr. K's little study has expanded dramatically, and we have many more patients and many more years of data that support that what we're doing is indeed working.
Can you explain to me or anybody that might be listening or watching a little bit more of how this actually
Works.
works?
Yeah, yeah. So the patients enroll in the program. They get a text message from us. I'm going to give you the normal route, right? They get a text message from us, and they say, "Your doctor," and they'll say, "Dr. Davis, would like you to be in the Sonar program so that Dr. Davis, can keep better tabs on you, patient, between visits, and I can figure out what's going to keep you more well between visits." So the patient clicks to enroll in the program. We get incredible uptick on that because patients are excited to be in the program. And then what we do is we collect symptom information between visits. So we send them a survey on a regular basis, and we collect information and find out what's causing that patient to deteriorate. And then we surface them back up to the physician should they be in a situation where they need additional care. We also put that patient on different pathways. So there's also a whole subset of patients that are well. We're collecting symptom data, but we find out that there's no problem with these patients. And so we also offer them supportive services that we know for patients like them will help them keep their inflammation at bay. So I like to sometimes liken this to it's like a car system that where we want to see whether or not the check engine light goes on, but there's also things we can do to just make sure that their oil's being changed on time. So we're
Sure.
doing both of those things. So we're trying to determine whether or not that check engine light's going on, but we're also offering them things like nutrition support, mind gut therapy services, recipes and nutrition and access to dietitians. So there's a lot of different supportive care for those patients in between visits.
Well, I mean, this area I feel like is so it's so important just in general because of the level of symptoms that people have.
Hmm.
I know I talked to a lot of people that just say, hey, look, I have acid reflux, or I have common heartburn or whatever. And if you're struggling with that day after day or week after week, it can become a hard sort of struggle. I know we were caring for an older family member of mine as well, who kept saying that she had back pain. I have back pain, I have back pain. And then we took her to the hospital, and she had a hiatal hernia and a bunch of other stuff, and it had nothing to do with her back. But essentially, the doctors were like, well, as we all age, I mean, our bodies start to signal um, differently. And in her case,
Right.
she thought that she was having back pain, but needed to have some corrective things done. So
It's
I
true.
certainly hear a lot of really great things that I feel like this would be good for as well.
I think that in this, we were talking about AI and technology earlier. This world is equipping us to be able to identify disease progression faster. So we
Mm.
should be able to identify the hiatal hernias and the IBD flares and pick a winner, kidney deterioration, right? Like all of these things sooner because we have more data, information, and ability to process all of that better. And that's fantastic for all of us as future current patients as well as cost for the system, if we can find a way to bring it to market.
Yeah, I do look forward though to the day too, whenever the surveys that you have to take are more in line versus um having to take like a routine survey, because I get them from my care providers as well, and I mean, there are plenty of times whenever I ignore them, and then there are
Oh
other
yeah,
times whenever I'm like, yeah, I definitely need to fill this thing out because
that's right.
it's important for just staying on top of my care.
We're currently working on integrating more Apple Health data into our application, and because we have 5 years of data and we know where some of the triggers and some of the leading indicators are, the holy grail is you overlay that with your Apple Health data and you start to see what the leading indicators are in the Apple Health data, so that we don't have to ask some people questions as frequently, because guess what, like, yeah, they don't want to take the survey on a regular basis. Like, they don't, we're trying to find other ways to stay in front of them, because it is important for us to collect that longitudinal data, because otherwise you kind of miss, some data points. You might miss the potential flare, but you're also trying to do it in as unobtrusive way as possible. There are some new technologies that will come out at some point. There's a sweat sensor. There's, I mean, in the GI world, there's smart toilets. There's like all kinds of things that will help us be able to do things without a person having to take a survey. But right now, they have to tell us their symptoms.
Well, I do find it interesting, and I know there's probably somebody already thinking about this, but every single time that I'm in pain, the one thing that seems to be an indicator of pain overall is when my blood pressure is way off or my pulse is way off.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep, the
so,
pulse.
yes, so it seems to me like somebody's got to be working on that alert inside of the Apple phone. Hey, you just woke up in the middle of the night, your blood pressure seems to be off and your pulse seems to be off. What's going on? Oh, I have a headache or I have a stomach ache or whatever would be, a nice little follow on to that, I guess, because then they
Y-
could capture all that same information. But
You are so
yeah.
right. You are so right. That it's the tip of the iceberg.
So let's talk a little bit about predictive analytics, right? So one of the things that I read as well that SonarMD has is predictive analytics. So I'd love to hear more about that as well.
Yeah, so in a way, some of what I was talking about is a little bit that predictive analytics. What I think the difference is that we also get claims data from the payer, so we are also able to kind of create different cohorts and baselines for different groups of patients. So everybody is going to have their starting point. If you collect symptoms the first day, you only are having one data point, so you don't really know a lot about that patient. But if you have the claims data that supports that who that patient is, we at least have two data points, right? That also are telling us that this is a patient that has to be watched in a certain way. So our predictive analytics are set up so that we can predict when specific deterioration is likely to occur. And then I always think of my data person, because he always says the same thing. It's really hard to predict a negative, or it's really hard to measure a negative. So what we have to do is we have to predict that we think somebody is deteriorating and keep them from deteriorating. So you don't have the data point of them deteriorating to prove that you were right about about your prediction, right? But what you can do over time then is, if you have a control and you have, historical data, then you are able to see that your predictive analytics are working, and have them, kind of work, or I was going to say accelerate themselves, right? It's like,
Mhm.
so our predictive engine gets smarter over time, because we can see it working in place, because we're seeing the not hits on the plane as opposed to the hits on the plane.
Sure. I mean, it's also important as well to be able to to guide and point as best as possible. I feel like data and analytics people, this is kind of their moment, right? Because they're
Oh,
getting,
it
more and
is.
more data from all of the things that we have, and so
Yes.
also good.
I love you saying it's their moment. It's true. I mean, it's true. Can you imagine? Like,
Right.
you can make more things happen faster than you ever could have conceived in the past. And the ability for analytics to generate insights on their own without you having to generate them, like for like way back in the day when you're an analyst, you had to kind of have your hypotheses and then go look
Right.
for something to support your hypotheses, and now the data will actually retrieve insights without you having to feed it information. That's game changing.
Absolutely. Well, and I've said this a few times on other podcast episodes too. I've been in companies before. The data and analytics people are sitting in meetings, and all the scientists are worried about all the data that they're seeing. Oh my gosh, it's so noisy, or it's this, or it's that.
Yep.
And then all of a
Yep.
sudden, the data and analytics people do some filtering and adjusting, and everything's clear again, and everybody's happy. And I just look at their capabilities are can be magical at times as well, in terms of looking
Yeah.
at things. So
Because I hadn't worked in on the payer side for most of my career, I wasn't really exposed to actuarial science. I mean, you hear about it, you make actuary jokes and all that kind of stuff, but actuarial science in healthcare is absolutely fascinating. And back to the like your point about the, kind of running some filters and making some changes, and in our world, like changing the risk adjustment, changing the timeline, changing the carve outs, all these different things, suddenly like a new story appears, and
yeah,
it is fascinating and kind of cool.
absolutely. So tell me a little bit about some of the most significant challenges that you've had in your current role, and how do you address them?
Yeah, wow. I wish I could say that I can't answer that question because I've had no challenges whatsoever, but that would be not real for anybody to say. One of them, I'll just piggyback on what I just said. One of them was actuarial stuff. You don't know what you don't know, so you don't know that you can get yourself in trouble without creating the right model of measurement. So, a good example is, we had this concept where we said, well, a patient costs $40,000. And if we come in at 36, then we're just going to share that $4,000 savings. Seems pretty straightforward to me. And then, and then somebody says, well, how are you going to compare to the 30? How are you going to compare it? Like, how are you going to, and you say, well, I don't know. Like, so then then you learn this whole notion of there's a concurrent control or a historical control, and each of them have different um, sort of statistical thresholds for variability. So you might have, because you don't want to have noise in your data. You don't want to not have your measurement count simply because of data anomalies. So you learn a little bit about that, and then somebody says, well, what if your population is riskier than your the population that's being measured? Oh, yeah, I didn't think of that. So I guess we should probably have some sort of risk adjustment as well. And there's like those weird, things, trauma and, end stage renal disease and things like that. You probably shouldn't have those in your measured. So you take those out. So I'm but you get what I mean. Like
Right.
you don't know what you don't know until you kind of take it on. Um, I would also argue that if you're in a startup, it's better not to know all of those things out of the gate too, because it'll freeze you and you'll think you can't do something, and when you can get it going. I think from a challenge standpoint, people is always a challenge. Not like you can make a perfect job description, you can hire for that, and you always learn something else about that person. Mostly I would say good, right? You learn that this person is really good at data, and wow, they also happen to have a really strategic brain that you can use on some projects. And so you kind of take that little part of them and you move them over here and have them do a little bit of that too. But you learn that maybe the person that you hired, I'll always pick on sales because you hire the salesperson, and this is a universal sales characteristic, so I'm not offending anybody. Maybe they're not their attention to detail is not great. That's universal, right? So then you have to pair them with somebody whose attention to detail is great, so that you can ensure that you're not losing your contracts and you're not getting kind of the I's dotted and T's crossed, so that we can operationalize what's been sold. So I would say the challenges I have had are ones related to just doing all of those little fine movements to ensure that, going back to our early conversation, that when you're up in the balcony, you can see all that white space. So the challenge that I have is making sure that I'm putting the right people in the right white spaces at the right time, and that's hard. It's hard, and it's hard when you infinite resources. You can just over hire, right? You always put like 10 people into a spot that needs 5, but if you're trying to right size this, it's very, very hard.
Yeah. I mean, and that's such a critical point too, because, um, sometimes we're hired to play a certain role, and yet our strengths may be somewhere else. And,
Thousand
um,
percent.
how many people have I talked to on the podcast? So we start this question with what led you to life sciences, and oftentimes
Yeah.
people will say, "Hey, look, I was set off to go this direction, and I completely did a 180 and came back the opposite
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
only to find myself here in life sciences." And I think that's true when for your team members too. That ability to sort of accept the fact that, hey, look, you're not the greatest all around player. You have
Right.
certain skills, and whatever those skills are, you just have to kind of lean into those and accept who you are.
That is so true. So true. Yeah, lean into those strengths. And I want, like, it's a lot more, it's a lot less work to lean into somebody's strengths than it is to spend cycles worrying about what they don't have. Like, you just got to solve that differently.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me more about the specific goals that SonarMD aims to achieve within the next few years. Where do you see the company going?
Yeah. So right now we are working with 4 different payers. So we work in the state of North Carolina, Minnesota, California, and Illinois. Our goal is to have more depth in each of those states. So right now we we manage a certain number of lives in each of those states, and we'd like to expand to managing more patients with inflammatory bowel disease, because we think we can make a much bigger impact, just simply based on what we do. So we'd like to also expand states. So we have goals to just grow beyond that. But we have a few others that I think are a little more, kind of thinking a little bit more broadly about what we do. So one is, there are other GI diseases that behave similarly to inflammatory bowel disease, meaning they can deteriorate without warning, can be managed with close monitoring, and you can reduce utilization by that close monitoring. We already have the payer contracts, and we already have the relationship with the bricks and mortar GI physicians. So I think it's a natural expansion for us to look at what are those other diseases that can help to save the system money, provide really great care for patients, and be done in as an extension of a physician practice. There are also some opportunities. There are a number of patients. In fact, I wouldn't quite say the majority, but a lot more than anybody would expect, who have diseases, have inflammatory bowel disease, but really aren't actively managed right now. And the barrier to them being actively managed is usually they don't have a relationship with a physician. They don't think they're sick enough. That's probably the main two. And so I would say I'd like us to be able to build a model that goes a little bit upstream, where we don't have to necessarily be attributed a patient population to manage on behalf of that payer in concert with the GI physician, but instead, let's also go to the payer and let's say, hey, anybody that has this disease should be monitored, and how do we provide them with tools and resources so that they're monitored to stay well, but also if and when they need to see a GI physician, they have the ability to get in to see one much more quickly.
Mm.
And where I think that's important is, if you look across the nation, I think what was the 50% of the counties in the United States don't have a GI. And if you're in most major markets, the wait time to see a GI is over 3 months. So the access to this traditional type of care is really, really considerable. So how do we reduce that so that we can have a better outcome for the patients?
Yeah. Well, also true. What's the greatest piece of leadership advice that you've ever received?
Ever received? Hmm. That's a great question. I think I would say, um, being for me, it's a little bit more about emulating those people that I think have been really good leaders. And I think the couple things that are really important to me is, one, I want to be very real to my team, because I think it encourages them to be real. Everybody, everybody has lives outside of the work that they do, and I think I will have more, earned loyalty and appropriate, and good work from people that are honest about what's going on in the rest of their life as well. So that's one characteristic that I think is really helps you be a good leader. The other one that I think is incredibly important, and one that I work very hard on, is I want people to be able to feel like they have a soft landing and can fail. Because if you don't, then you won't take risks. And if you don't take risks, we are not going to innovate. And I bet you, being in a creative field too, like, I mean, I have been in environments where I would have been scared to death to take a risk. So I know that you have to embrace and celebrate misses and celebrate, people that have tried and failed, in order to truly cultivate that spirit and ensure that people feel like they have a place to land if they were to, make a mistake, because there's going to be some wins in there as well, and I want those wins too. So those are two really important one, and then the last one is, just, I think it's really important to be a humble leader, and not a fake one, real. Like, we're all just humans. We're all just trying to do the best we can with what we have. You and I talked about, getting on things like this and trying to make sure you say the right words and all these
Right.
kinds of things. And, we're just people. We're just trying to do the best we can with what we have. And so I think having like a level of humbleness is also something that I want to make sure that my team always, comes to the table with.
Yeah, the innovation one, just to spend a minute on that as well. So I just mentioned that we just brought on some new people, and with our new folks, I I have some things that I want done inside of the company,
Mhm.
and so I've selfishly, I had tasked both of them with things that I want done inside of the company. Um, and one individual, and it was funny because within 24 hours, I mean, essentially it had a major failure, that was very
Mm,
public,
mm,
and
mm.
I was just like, yeah, that's okay. I mean, you're in a safe space, because I mean, what he was essentially impacting was my company. It wasn't a client's. It wasn't somebody
Right,
else's. Thank goodness.
right, right.
But at the same time, I want people to get that sense of, hey, look, it's safe to fail. And regardless, we just have to look at, like, what do we have to fix to make it right and keep moving forward, and don't look back at the fact that, hey, look, it could take a while to fix the problem that was caused, but
That's right.
that's not a problem. We just have to, what's the path and what are we going to work on? Let's just focus on
Yes.
that.
And a
So,
fast fail is helpful too.
yes.
Like
Yeah.
24-hour fail is a lot different than one that builds
Well,
over
I
time.
was telling my wife, I was like, look, if I were this guy, I'd be sitting there going, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? At the same time, I'm just like, I kept sending a message. I'm like, it's okay. What's the next step? What do you need
Yeah,
to do to get me from where I am to the next part where this gets fixed? And let's just
yeah,
outline it. And I clearly, sort of reflected that back and said, look, in front of a client, I would do the same thing. I'm going to tell you the
yeah.
same exact thing. We just have to, like, what's the path that gets us from here where things are broken to things being fixed and wonderful again? What does that look like? So,
What
yeah.
does that path look like? And good on you to also say, like, you know, you know the answers here. So tell me what you think. Don't run in and scoop it up and fix it for them. Because that's also part of the process. That's also part of the learning.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, what inspires you, Beth?
I am inspired. I'm inspired by my team. I feel a great responsibility to them to be a good leader and to, I'm giving people jobs too, right? And I want them to be um, feel rewarded and feel good about what they're contributing to the world. And I do think I'm creating future leaders, so it inspires me to be in a role where I can set the tone to create those future leaders. That's very important to me. I'm inspired also by, my family and I have kids, and I always say, if you're going to spend time away from them or miss things, I definitely have missed things in my long work career, having worked through having even littler kids. If I'm gonna miss things, I want to be proud of what I've missed them for, and I'm inspired to do that. I'm inspired to be able to tell them, hey, your mom, really, really did some interesting things and made an impact on a lot of people, and here's how. So I'm inspired to do that.
So ultimately important. And also important that your kids know. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's funny having adult kids now that have children of their own, and they look back and they're like, I remember giving dad a hard time about this or that. And it's really hard to balance now. They have professional roles of their own. So
Oh yeah,
good
they have more opinions, don't they?
good for them to know. What
That's
concerns
right.
you?
Let's see, what concerns me. I think it's like most people, things outside of my own control. Like big policy changes concerns me. Not being able to uh, have the impact that I want to have because of forces outside of my control is the things. Those are the things that keep me up at night.
Absolutely. Last question. What excites you?
Ah, so it's what inspires, what concerns, and now what excites me. Ooh, that's a great question. I will rely here on, I have a little bit of a competitive streak. And so I do like, and I'm also like a big sports fan. Like I like watching sports. I like playing them to some degree. I mean, I'm a hack tennis player, but um it's exciting to win. So that's
Mm,
why I was building up to that. It's exciting to win. It's exciting to, I was talking to my little sales team, and it's exciting to like conceive of something and do all the work that you think, and then be rewarded with the win, right? Like it's like this whole cycle is so tangible. You're like,
mm.
oh look, I built something, or I had a really cool concept, I built it right, and people bought it. And it's that last piece that just, it, I don't know, it kind of gets me going a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like that's the one thing that most salespeople are very wired for is they see that they see that last little win bit as like the ultimate where I mean, if you go back to your
Yeah,
data example earlier, I mean, the data and analytics people are
no,
completely,
not wired
immersed
that
in
way.
like what is the latest technique I can use to get to the
That's
data
right.
that I have. And there are people that are all excited about the tech. But yes, for certainly being excited about the win or somebody taking the thing that you've developed to that next
Yeah,
level is yeah, I mean, a
it's
clear
exciting.
finish line that we can all measure as well.
It's a clear finish line. There you go.
Yeah. Well, Beth, how thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success Podcast and for telling us about SonarMD. I greatly appreciate you being here, and look forward to seeing the company continue to grow and be successful in the future.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot.